All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Patty Duran, co-chair of BeltLine Rail Now, which is a nonprofit grassroots group working to assure that BeltLine Rail project remains a priority in our local transit plan and built as quickly as possible. All the transit projects in the Moore MARTA project list in Atlanta are important, and leadership and money at the state level is needed to make it happen. So to that end, we have a set of candidates tonight for State House District 57. We will spend the next hour listening to their thoughts and positions on transit issues that affect Atlanta, not just for House District 57, but for all of Metro Atlanta. Next slide. Speaking of District 57, here is a map of the district and the many neighborhoods that it serves. And you can see on the map that it covers a large swath of the Beltline, which is the green line around that district. And all the neighborhoods represented are listed there in the slide. Since there is no opponent on the November ballot, one of you on tonight's virtual stage is going to the Georgia House to face a whole host of issues. But tonight, as I said, we're going to keep the conversation focused on transit. There's an undeniable relationship between transit, equity, affordability, and sustainability. And so you'll see a handout that BeltLine Rail Now created in the handout box of your screen, and you can easily download it there. I encourage you to download it and take a look at it. When it comes to transit here in Atlanta, the current system is inadequate. Our population is expected to double in the next 25 to 30 years, and that's unacceptable to many Atlantans. We'd like to welcome tonight's participants. I'm going to turn it over to have WABE's Susanna Capelouto, who will introduce the candidates and will be our event moderator. And once the forum ends, please be sure to visit the candidates' websites to see their views on other important issues other than transit. I will now hand this event over to Susanna, and thank you so much for moderating, Susanna.
Well, thank you, Patty. Good evening and welcome. And this is my first time moderating a virtual forum, but we hope that it will still be a good experience for all. That's all we can do right now. So before we started, we drew names to determine in which order the candidates get to speak. And we will rotate who gets to answer a question first and last. So everyone has agreed to the order. We asked that candidates limit their responses to 2 minutes or less. Should a candidate exceed that time, we will let them know. Should a candidate mention an opponent, that candidate will then get 30 seconds to respond. As the moderator, I will ask each candidate 4 questions, and these questions are core transit questions that were developed by BeltLine Rail Now, so these are not my questions. After we ask these 4 core questions, we will open it up to the audience. If you do have a question, please use the question box on the side, and you can pose your question there. First, we will start, and we will give each candidate 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And according to our drawing, Stacy, you go first.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone watching at home for spending some time with us. I am Stacey Evans. I am a candidate for House District 57, and like many of you at home, though, I wear a lot of different hats. And also, like many of you at home, I feel like my multitasking skills are getting tested more and more every day. But I am a wife. I've been married to my husband, Andrew, for 15 years. I'm also a mother of 2. I have a daughter, Ashley, who's 8, and a son, Jack, who's 1. I'm also an attorney, and I'm a former legislator. I spent 7 years under the Gold Dome. But above all else, I am a fighter. I've been a fighter my whole life. I fought my way out of poverty as a child. I grew up in Northwest Georgia, in Ringgold, Georgia, raised by a single teenage mother who didn't finish high school. And as you might imagine, we struggled. We moved a lot. We lived in about 16 different homes by the time I was 18. I witnessed domestic violence and a lot of other things that I wish I could unsee. But I was able to chart a different path for myself because of the Hope Scholarship. It allowed me to be the first in my family to go to college. I went to the University of Georgia. I stayed there for law school, which is where I met my husband. And the rest, as they say, is history. I went on to a life that I never could have imagined as my younger self. And I continue to be a fighter. In the courtroom, I fought on behalf of whistleblowers who were brave and stood up and brought forward allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. I helped recover hundreds of millions of dollars on behalf of the taxpayers, and that work continues today. I fought as a legislator on behalf of students like me who needed access to financial aid to go to college. I expanded the Hope Grant for technical colleges. I fought on behalf of women, fighting against anti-choice legislation that kept coming up. I fought on behalf of the LGBTQ community and the business community and all of us to fight against the hateful so-called religious liberty legislation. And I'm ready to get back and fight again. This is a district that deserves a progressive fighter who can get going on the offense on day one. I submit to you that I am that candidate. I hope you will vote for me on June 9th or before. You vote by mail so that we can all stay safe. And if I don't get to answer any of the questions that you have tonight, I hope you'll reach out to me through the website at staceyevans.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Janae, you're next.
Hi, I'm Janae Shepherd, and I'm the former president of Adair Park, where I served for 3 years. I'm a mom to two very different children. I have a 21-year-old son. I know I don't look it. It's amazing, right? And I also have a 19-month-old baby girl. I am a strong proponent for public transit when it is done, thought out equitably. And there is a Harvard study that actually says access to transportation is the single most important factor in an individual's ability to escape poverty. And I feel like Atlanta today is a product of its history. The people, decision makers, the institutions, the choices that we've made. If we want to be competitive, we must ensure that all communities have access to jobs, parks, education, and all the necessary resources for a fulfilling life. On June the 9th, I do hope that you will choose me. I'm not your typical politician, but I'm a person who cares about her community, who cares about the people that are in the community, and I do not subscribe to politics, only people. So on June 9th, vote Janae Shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. Alex, you're next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alex Wan, and I'm a candidate for the Georgia State House District 57 seat. I hail from Stone Mountain, Georgia, a product of the DeKalb County Public Schools. I have an engineering degree from Georgia Tech and an MBA from Wharton Business School. Professionally, I serve as the executive director of Horizons Atlanta. We provide tuition-free summer enrichment programs for over 1,000 Atlanta public school students, and we serve actually 7 of the 9 high school clusters here in APS. I am a former 2-term Atlanta City Council member. Before that, I served on the board of Invest Atlanta, and I'm also currently the Fulton and City of Atlanta citizen representative on the Atlanta Regional Commission. So if you add all that up, I've actually been advocating on behalf of Atlantans on transportation issues for 14 years. Like many of the candidates on this dais today, we are aiming to champion very progressive values down at the state capitol as your next state rep. Why I am the best candidate for this position is the fact that I've lived in the district for over 25 years. And like I said, I'm the only candidate who's actually represented the city of Atlanta before. I'd like to take that experience, that knowledge, that depth, those relationships that I've built across the community, and the understanding of why it matters and is as important to us, both Atlanta and the region and for the state, to the state capitol. To demonstrate the breadth of my collaboration and the coalition that I'm going to bring to the table to advocate on our behalf and on behalf of Georgians, I'm proud to say that I had the endorsement of the LGBTQ Victory Fund, as well as Planned Parenthood Southeast Advocates, the Asian American Advocacy Fund, and the one I'm most proud of is I've been endorsed by the Atlanta City Council President, Felicia Moore, and I think that demonstrates the opportunities that we have to really strengthen the ties between the city of Atlanta and the state capitol. I'm looking forward to the questions tonight. For more information about me and my campaign, please go to alexwan4atlanta.com or follow me on social media, alexwan4ATL. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Kyle, you're next.
Good evening and hello to everyone that is joining us. I am Kyle Lamont and I am a candidate for House District 57. District 57 is extremely close to my heart. I was literally born and raised here in Atlanta. Was born at Georgia Baptist, which is now Atlanta Medical, and as a child grew up in Southwest Atlanta, where all of my family continues to reside. So Southwest Atlanta has a special place in my heart, as well as the district, and for all of the things that I enjoy throughout the district. Currently, I serve on the Fulton County Development Authority Board of Directors, where I oversee tax dollars that are spent for large-scale developments throughout the city. And oftentimes I'm quoted as fighting for equity and community improvement throughout any development that is funded through the county level. I also serve on the Atlanta Land Trust Board of Directors, where we help to put out affordable housing throughout the city. And last but not least, I was recently appointed to the BeltLine TADAC, where I can continue to give input and insight into the things that concern us as residents when it goes to our tax dollars being spent to fund projects on the BeltLine. But by trade, I am a sommelier. I have been in the service industry for most of my life. So servitude is a mantle that I wear, and I wear it proudly. I am excited to get to work on many of the things that I've already been working for you at the state level. So if you'd like to learn more about myself and the campaign and the many issues that we stand on, please visit us at www.kylelamont.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that we're not able to get to this evening. And thank you, BeltLine Rail, for allowing this forum to happen this evening.
Thank you so much. And now it's time to get to our core questions. The first core question today, and Janae, you will be the first one to answer this one, okay? Today's pressing health and economic crisis demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Many voters expect more from all levels of government, particularly when it comes to finding creative solutions and accomplishing more with fewer resources. Please comment on Atlanta's immediate and long-term transit needs and how you'd be able to lead the effort as a member of the Georgia State House. Janae, you have the first answer.
Well, I think that we start with expanding the factor that we only put in approximately 1.24% into transit here in Georgia. We put in the least amount of money for transit compared to a lot of other cities that are growing so rapidly. I mean, if we look back in time, in 1971, I believe it was when there was supposed to be an agreement where the state was supposed to put into the transit, into MARTA, and they literally just was able to bypass that promise of, I think it was supposed to be 0.5 cent or three-quarters of a cent. And then what they did was they upped the taxes to a whole penny, which left them totally blameless to actually deposit money into the MARTA system. We need to figure out how to get that money down the pipe. It's been way overdue for transit to be expanded here in Atlanta and the surrounding area. We need to be able to help people get to jobs, get to their places of education, get to more opportunities. We all know that even with the way Atlanta is shaped, the south side of Atlanta don't have jobs like the north side of Atlanta has jobs that are paying at the same rate. So it's extremely important that we put pressure on our governor for that budget to be raised. We can't get by with just giving 1.24%. That's it. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Wonderful, great. I appreciate it. Alex, you're next. Now, the question again, please comment on Atlanta's immediate and long-term transit needs and how you'd be able to lead the effort as a member of the Georgia State House.
Sure. I'm going to break these up into 3 different categories. The first one is immediate term. What we need to continue doing, as we have been doing at the ARC in conjunction with GDOT, is encouraging the use of transit through transportation demand management systems, as well as there's a thing called Georgia Commute Options Program, where we're incentivizing workers and companies to encourage their employees to use transit. We also need to focus on last mile connectivity in terms of partnering with rideshare or increasing bicycle or pedestrian facilities so people can get to where they need to after they get off of transit. And I'm proud to have been the sponsor that passed legislation that created the Bicycle and Pedestrian Planning Commission for the City of Atlanta. In the near term, we need to continue focusing on transit-oriented development. We need to talk about density, and we got to think about how that fits into where our transit is now, so that we're building in the right places. I'm proud to have Lindbergh, the development over there was in my district when I was a city council member, and it was a big focus of the planning effort there. We also need to work on the Atlanta BeltLine. We have to accelerate funding for the transit projects that we have on deck already. And that if that means redesigning, revisiting segments that are slated for the near term, we need to really do that. And over the longer term, it really is about funding. We need to relax MARTA is the largest public transportation system in the country that isn't supported by the state. We've got to change that and provide funding for operations. We need to encourage and find ways to get Cobb and Gwinnett onto MARTA in terms of contributions, as well as continue working with Fulton and DeKalb and see if they will pass a partial penny like the city did. And I co-sponsored the legislation that authorized that referendum for more MARTA. So that kind of outlines quickly short term, medium term, and long term, but we got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much. Kyle, you are next. The question again, comment on Atlanta's immediate and long-term transit needs and how you'd be able to lead the effort as a member of the Georgia House.
So when I think of Atlanta's short-term transportation needs, I think of how oftentimes development throughout the city is tailored towards car transit. We are overbuilding our parking garages and our parking lots, and it costs nearly $20,000 to $25,000 for one space of parking to be built. And as we continue to wrap our minds around what a multi-modular transit system looks like in Atlanta, we have to stop catering to cars and start thinking larger. So some of the short-term goals would be to start thinking about development in an equitable fashion that allows for people that may not even be able to afford vehicles the opportunity to get places in the city safely and quickly. Some of the other short-term things that can be done are the things such as making our streets safer to even access the BeltLine. Because I live in Southwest Atlanta, I know firsthand experience just how imperative it is to create safe streets around Cascade Road, Ralph David, Metropolitan, and these streets make up a large amount of pedestrian accidents, fatalities, and car accidents, yet we continue to underfund the projects that will serve our community best, even while trying to access the BeltLine. On a larger scale, I think it is important that we give a new look to the gas tax bill that doesn't allow us to put funding towards any other projects other than highways and streetways. On the long-term goal, I think we also must figure out how to partner with our allies in other counties to create a larger tax base to continue to fund the development on the BeltLine to make it more equitable and expanded.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Stacey, question goes to you. Atlanta's immediate and long-term transit needs and how you'd be able to lead the effort as a member of the Georgia House.
We all know, hopefully, that transit is economic development, and it is vital that we make sure our whole city is connected. One of the short-term things that we need to work on is expanding MARTA. There are places that MARTA doesn't go. For example, Venetian Hills is left out of both good MARTA lines. They have fewer bus lines. We also know that the BeltLine, any BeltLine transit is not going to hit them as well. We've got to make sure that we're including all of the city. So certainly expanding MARTA, making sure that buses are not our long-term option, adding more buses, but in the short term, there are folks that don't have access, and that's what gets them to their jobs. We need transit on the BeltLine. The BeltLine was not meant to be a parks project. It was a transit project, and we need to finish that. The best thing that your state representative can do to move forward on all these projects, which would also include connecting the other regions of Metro Atlanta and eventually having commuter lines throughout the state, because that will also ease congestion on Atlanta's inner highways and inner streets. But the best thing your state rep can do is get funding. And that starts with getting a constitutional amendment so that the motor fuel tax is not limited to roads and bridges. Roads and bridges are important, and we need to make sure that they are safe and sound. We all saw the tragedy that occurred with the 85 North Bridge collapse. We've got to make sure that we're keeping those things strong. We do need some of that money, obviously, to go to roads and bridges, but we need some of it to go to transit. Georgia is woefully behind other states in contributing to transit, and so goes Atlanta, so goes this state. And so the transit problems of Atlanta are also the problems of the state. So getting that money is going to be crucial. But relationships and working across the aisle is what your state representative needs to do to make this happen. It's not our job to go down and convince other Atlanta legislators to support these projects. That's done. It's to convince the folks in South Georgia and North Georgia and in the suburbs that this is the best thing for our state as a whole. And that's where my relationships and experience make me the best candidate to move us forward on these plans.
Thank you, Stacey. And now we get to our next question. This one is about funding. MARTA currently relies on a funding system that relies heavily on sales taxes. It is inadequate, unpredictable, and places a disproportionately and unfair burden on lower income residents. Since Metro Atlanta contributes significantly to the state, why hasn't the state stepped up to help pay for the expanded transit network Atlanta needs? What will you do to help change that? Alex, you go first on this question.
Thank you for the question. I think for a long time, the roadblock or the obstacle was a lack of faith in the operational capacity or capabilities of MARTA. There were some governance concerns, and when Keith Parker joined MARTA to lead it, led it out of that cloud. And I think what you saw after that was more confidence in the system, and hence voters approving the city of Atlanta's half a penny. And just more of a, I think the other piece of it is, and that's where the work of the Atlanta Regional Commission has been important, as well as the creation in 2018 of the Atlanta Region Link Transit Link, better known as the ATL, to come up with a cohesive plan. I mean, transit is a regional issue. It's not just City of Atlanta. It's not just the 5 counties that make up the area. It is a regional problem. So I think that's the first thing that we need to do, is just make sure that there is a regional plan that all the municipalities and impacted communities are bought into. We need to give the ATL a little bit of time. I think they're making good progress. And then from there, I think we also need to demonstrate that counties like Cobb and Gwinnett are going to commit to it as well, and continue to provide funding. The other piece of it is I think once we have more skin in the game in terms of the state, as well as our regional areas, it'll put us in a better position to compete for federal funding for expansion projects. I mean, these projects are not inexpensive. The BeltLine to build out, it has an estimated price tag of $5 billion. We don't have that here in the state. We're going to need some help. So good governance, I think more community buy-in, and a really cohesive and well thought out plan are the 3 ingredients to make sure that we can get more state support, and then ultimately more federal support.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Kyle, now the question goes to you. Why hasn't the state stepped up to help pay for the expanded transit network Atlanta needs, and what will you do to help change that?
So we have seen studies across the United States that say that state-funded transit communities are most efficient and the most widely used throughout the United States. So it goes without saying that we must continue to push our governor and push our fellow legislators to join us in creating that area in the budget, whether that's through, again, revising the gas tax that only allows us to fund highways and bridges and roadways, and making sure that we can fund other transit modes so that it just doesn't serve those that drive on our highways. I do agree. I think that it has been a uphill battle as far as getting MARTA to the point where they've even been in the green. I think for the first time we've seen MARTA operate in the green, and since its development and since its start. So I think we are certainly headed in the right direction, and I do strongly believe that as we continue to even have community input on our level, that we're able to make sure that the people that hold the offices, such as those that work for MARTA, are making sure that they are spending our money wisely towards transit-oriented development, and also ensuring that because we put such a large percentage into the development of MARTA, that transit actually comes to our communities. It goes without saying that Southwest Atlanta needs transit-oriented development like no other place in this district, and we must figure out how to make it happen. We must find it in the budget on the Georgia Department of Transportation to fund these projects that are so important to all of us.
Thank you, Kyle. Stacy, the question now goes to you. Why hasn't the state stepped up to help pay for the expanded transit network Atlanta needs, and what will you do to help change that?
Definitely the state has been slow to this game. There has been a huge shift, though, in attitudes, and I was there when the shift went from the state not being much of a fan of MARTA to becoming a fan. And Keith Parker did an amazing job in moving us toward the place where we are now, but we still have so much to go. And I think part of selling this idea to the state is talking about how this helps the whole state and how transit is not just MARTA. Like I said, the attitude toward MARTA has changed, but we need to make sure that we're talking to folks about, we're also talking about transit on the BeltLine. Folks from all over the state, not just in the city of Atlanta, know about the BeltLine. It is an amazing accomplishment, and folks will buy into that more if we talk about how this is also something that's not just MARTA. It's certainly MARTA, but it's also, excuse me, it's also rail on the BeltLine. It's also extended bus routes. It's all these different things. So I think that's part of it. But I will tell you, the number one way that we're going to get more money in our state budget for transit is to elect more Democrats. This is a progressive district. We've already said there's not even a Republican running. We're going to elect a Democrat. Part of this job as being a partisan elected official is growing the team. I spent time as the chair of the Democratic Legislative Caucus. Part of my job was to go out and recruit candidates and help flip seats. And that's what I'm excited to get back and do again, because we can work on convincing Republicans and others to support these transit needs, and we can get them. I'm not saying it's hopeless, but we have a much friendlier ear when we're talking to a Democrat. And so getting more Democrats is going to help us do that. And I see that as part of the job, and that's something I'm ready to do on day one as well.
Thank you very much, Stacy. And now, Janae, the question goes to you. Why hasn't the state stepped up to help expanded transit networks in Atlanta, and what will you do to help change that?
Well, I guess I'll be the one to talk about the pink elephant in the room. I think the reason why is because the 5 counties that it was initially supposed to be about, you have these counties dropping off, like Clayton County, Gwinnett, all the Cobb County, all the people who originally were years ago voting for it, yes, yes, yes. And then we turned it into this is a Black people thing. They're the one who need transit. It's not gonna, we won't, it'll be solved. They're gonna solve it on their own. I think the reason why is because of that same thinking. We're still thinking that this is not a problem for all of us. Everyone has had to sit in traffic. Everyone has had to just think about and want to be in tears when you think about 400, going up 400 during rush hour. God forbid that you're trying to get to Cobb County. My husband works in Cobb County and lives in Atlanta. It takes him an hour to get home. I think that if we stop getting in that mindset that this is not a everybody problem and not just a Southwest Atlanta problem or a people of color problem, that'd be probably the first step in trying to mend it. I'm glad that, like Stacey said, that the minds are changing because it's time. What we should do, like I said before, is we have to start voting, pushing back on how the money is allocated. 1.24%. Again, I'll go back to that. You can't live off of 1.24%.
Great. Thank you, Janae.
To expand the transit. But yep, that's my thought. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll now go to our third question, and the first one goes to Kyle. And it wouldn't be a transit forum without at least one question about the Beltline. You've already hinted at it. So without transit and the benefits it could deliver, the Beltline has produced vastly different results in different neighborhoods. In some, skyrocketing rents and property taxes are pushing out long-time residents. Are you worried we're letting the potential of the Beltline slip away? And if so, what will you do to prevent that? Kyle, this goes to you first.
What a fantastic question. It's so loaded, and it is so real what we face right now as a district. If we look at the Beltline throughout its touch points through the district, we see the vast disparities. Where the Beltline hits Piedmont Park, it is wide, it is beautiful. There are places that you can shop. There are restaurants that you can go into. There are condos above that. The density is there. The economic income for community is there. All the bells and whistles are happening at Piedmont Park. And then if you come down to my entrance here in Oakland City, there is a non-working cross light for you to cross over Donnelly to get to the Beltline. There are not many shops or restaurants and condos, but I think that is the scary part, because Oakland City and West End and Adair Park and Venetian Hills aren't supposed to look like Inman Park, Virginia Highland, and Morningside. They're two different spaces within the city and within the district, and they should be owned and individualized in their own spaces. You know, last year I led the fight along with Janae to call the Beltline out around development at Murphy Crossing. It's because we had seen a system that was failing the community. They had come to the community in 2006 and asked for community input, but never even issued the RFP until 3 years later. While community is still changing and the desires of the community is changing and the population is changing, we said no, development is happening now in our neighborhoods and we want to make sure our voices are heard. I will continue to take that fight to the State House and making sure that we call our needs out so that we can have the communities that we desire and that we deserve.
Thank you so much. Stacy, you are next. Are you worried we're letting the potential of the Beltline slip away? And if so, what will you do to prevent that?
Well, we've absolutely got to make sure that development is getting to all parts of the Beltline. That goes without saying. This, again, though, I will mention, this was never meant to be just a parks and a parks project or a pub crawl project. This was a transit project. So getting transit on the Beltline is part of what we should all be working for. But we got to remember all those things, whether it's the parks, whether it's the pub crawls and the businesses, or whether it is transit, it is going to increase the value of the land around the Beltline. That's just inevitable. More people, more things, more people want to be around them. And we've got to make sure that we're not pricing people out of neighborhoods that they built. And so affordable housing starts flashing right in front of our eyes. Now, a lot of this has to do with what the city of Atlanta does and how they structure the contracts between the developers and what community benefits have to be provided. But from the state level, we have to be ready to address the very real issue of affordable housing and what's going to happen to particularly our seniors who built these neighborhoods. We've got to be willing to go in and get creative and get crafty and dig in hard on the tax policy. And when we do that, we got to make sure that we're not just taking care of the seniors who have economic challenges, but we also want to make sure that we're not pricing young people out by giving too much of a tax break to the seniors. We don't want to keep these neighborhoods from growing and from young people being able to come in to afford those areas, and we don't want one person to shoulder all of the load. So we've got to be methodical, we've got to be deliberate, and we've got to be very creative, and we've got to have a very open mind about this, because we want the development to continue, but we want it to be smart. We want the communities to be involved. The state legislator can be a conduit between the city, the developers, and the state, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to tackle that tax policy.
Thank you. Janae, the question to you, are you worried we're letting the potential of the Beltline slip away? And if so, what will you do to prevent that?
I definitely believe we're letting the potential slip away. Everything that Kyle said is everything that is definitely a problem with what we're facing. I would love to see what's called an EEJ plan. It's basically equity, environment, and jobs plan. With this type of plan, you provide families and individuals with improved local transit, affordable homes that are near jobs and near transit. It's a plan that was put forth over on the West Coast. I think that's going to be our answer to really solving the BeltLine problem, the transit problem, is really looking at this from it has to be equitable standpoint. It can't be anything else. It has to be equitable. It has to be fair. I mean, I would love to even see a fair fares type of something come through our state legislation, where basically you give lower income residents who ride the transit the most, you give them a break on the fares. I would like to see these things come into play, because if we be honest, the South End would really carry the transit on the wider spectrum, because they're trying to get to jobs, they're trying to get to school. They really would carry that load. So as MARTA continues to increase their fares, and it would be nice to see people who are not able to pay those large fares, and as it increases, for them to get a break. Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. Alex, a question to you. Are you worried we're letting the potential of the BeltLine slip away? And if so, what will you do to prevent that?
Yeah, so I'd like to tackle this in two different areas. And I'd want to just say that I've been a big supporter of the BeltLine. When I got appointed to the Invest Atlanta board, that was right when the tax allocation district was approved by City Council. And so Invest Atlanta actually helped shepherd it on the first couple of years. In terms of the rail, yes, I'm concerned about that. Interestingly enough, right as we thought we would get good tax dollars to fund rail, or at least accelerate that, the Great Recession hit. And so that delayed any of the funding for potential rail. And now I'm worried as we go into this next great, whatever, if it's a recession, depression, that same phenomenon is going to happen just as we were about to be able to get some critical dollars for the rail. So we got to be creative in finding additional funding sources to build out the BeltLine, either through, I think it's been mentioned several times, diverting gasoline tax to help develop some of these transit projects, as well as really going after federal money. The other piece of it, though, is around the negative effects of the project, which folks have mentioned it, the fact that it's pushed people out of their homes. The reality of it is that appreciation happened a lot faster than I think anyone could have dreamed. Everyone was talking about a 5-year horizon, when in fact it happened over a 2 or 3 year period. And so there wasn't enough time or foresight to start implementing some of the relief measures that we should continue to talk about now to be able to keep people in their homes. I think we need to keep exploring homestead exemptions to protect seniors and legacy residents that have been in their homes for a long time, so that the property value appreciation doesn't push them out. I think we also need to look at, again, density. We need to be building more around these areas because more units actually will help in terms of the volume. What I worry about now is there enough, if people are so used to this being a trail and a path, will there no longer be support for transit? So we got to address that.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. All right. Now we get to our last transit core question. We'd like to know more about how Murphy's Crossing should be developed. And for this question,
Uh-oh. Did anybody catch her question?
No, I didn't hear
I was about to say, is everybody else frozen? I'm now confused.
I think she's frozen.
we will start with Stacy.
There she is.
Murphy's Crossing has the potential to be a game changer. It's a huge opportunity for the local. Sorry,
Susanna, your audio cut out. Are you able to start over?
Yes, I will start over. Murphy's Crossing has the potential to be a game changer by connecting existing MARTA rail to a variety of proposed transit projects. That list includes the BeltLine, Clayton County Commuter Rail, and Campbellton Road Light Rail. With 22 acres of land just waiting to be developed, it's a huge opportunity for the local and state economy. If elected, how will you help ensure Murphy's Crossing maximizes its potential in an equitable way? Did you all get that? Thank you. And Stacy, you
Yes,
start.
thank you. That was funny
Sorry.
timing. You hit on such a crucial point. Like all of these transit options, rail on the BeltLine, MARTA, buses, the streetcar, all of these things are only as good as they are connected to each other, because it's very rarely going to be that one piece of transit gets you all the way where you want to go. That's why the last mile connectivity is so important, and we got to make sure that we're addressing that. I think the best thing that your state representative can do is be a convener of people and try to keep everybody on the same page and keep people talking to each other. And I know that's something I did when I was elected before, is have these multi-level government and community stakeholder meetings where everybody's talking. Because one of the worst things that seems to happen in government is people get in their silos and they stop talking to each other, and we're not able to work forward, or people are reinventing the wheel. So I think that's a big part, is being a convener. And then I think talking about these things, being a voice, not only at the state level to talk about getting funding to make sure this all becomes a reality, but out and making sure that we're getting buy-in from the neighborhood. You have such a good platform to go out and talk and rally people around the cause. And I think this is something that everybody wants, everybody would like to see, but they've got to understand it, and they've got to see how it's going to affect them and their neighborhood. And so I think that's the part of this job that can help that project move forward.
Great, thank you so much. Janae, you are next. The question, if elected, how will you help ensure Murphy's Crossing maximizes its potential in an equitable way?
Well, that is one of our most dearest locations. Like Kyle mentioned, we worked on that together and I know Kyle will probably expound on this, but for us, keeping the conversation is extremely important. Of course, we're community leaders, so we're community engagers. So we are those people that go out there and push meetings and push agendas that are going to benefit our community. And that conversation needs to continue to have with everyone, not just a small amount of people. This has to come, I think, as a state representative, I would definitely push that the conversation still happens between our council, our city council, the people who own who have created the BeltLine. This conversation is so extreme and so important. I'm willing to connect every dot till we get everyone in that room that needs to hear what needs to be said as to what this development, because it's so rich and it has endless possibilities to bring so much life and so much energy to Southwest Atlanta. And I don't want to see it fall by the wayside, and I don't want just any type of developer who is not community minded to get a hold of it. But thank you.
Great. Thank you. Alex, to you, if elected, how will you help ensure Murphy's Crossing maximizes its potential in an equitable way?
I see the opportunity of this project in two different categories. I think the first one is operational. Because of the convergence of all the different systems, it's critical that we make this project work operationally the way it should, in terms of a seamless connection and transition between systems, so that it is operating and providing its transportation options and opportunities to the fullest. And to that, I think it's going to take someone who can convene people, bring people to the table, be it the city of Atlanta's new transportation department leader, to Clayton County, to the state, to make sure that everyone is talking and producing a product that makes operational sense. But I think what's more important than that is we've got to make sure it meets the needs of the community in which it's at. That's the biggest failures I've seen in city operation, is when you don't listen and you don't think about what's appropriate for a community. And to that, the way you combat that is you are transparent. I think that is one of the biggest things that a state legislature can do, is demand transparency of every stakeholder that's in there, by bringing the community folks to the table, no secret meetings, the right folks are at the table in the conversation, the city council member, the developers, as well as kind of the state and the city agencies, to make sure what's, the elements are right. If it's residential, if it's affordable housing, if it's business, if it's office space, we just got to make sure everyone's talking, because that's really when the best projects come out. And when it's not done, you spend years trying to undo or fix a bad product. And I have to take this moment to applaud Kyle and Janae for the work that they've done to bring attention to this, because that is critical. So thank y'all.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. All right, Kyle, the question to you: if elected, how will you help ensure Murphy's Crossing maximizes its potential in an equitable way?
So equitable development cannot be talked about without the voice of community. That is the equitable portion to development. And Murphy Crossing sits in the Oakland City neighborhood. And as a president of Oakland City, I took to heart the concerns and the voices of this community. And I took those concerns directly to the BeltLine, directly to the city of Atlanta, and made sure that we continue to lift the voices of this community. I have talked to many seniors that I have real fears around their property values being at such that they won't be able to call this community home. And those are the people that have the real grit in the game, the people that deserve to have a development, give them a food option, because Murphy Crossing sits in a food desert. These seniors deserve to have a safe development that allows them to be mobile throughout the development, well-lit areas. The younger people in the community are looking for places for childcare, and that has been a paramount thing that has come up over and over again. We simply want to be able to go to restaurants, whether they are on the low end or the high end. Give us an option, no matter what it is. Give us an option that we would like to see. This community is strong and it's resilient, and it's about time that we see a project that completely serves our needs and our desires. And at the state level, I will continue to make sure that our voices and concerns are heard. It goes without saying that Murphy Crossing is going to be one of the biggest developments that happen on the BeltLine in general. It is an economic opportunity for our communities of color to thrive. It is an opportunity for legacy community members to be able to stay in place. And for people, no matter what economic background and makeup you have a place to live. So I think that Murphy Crossing is going to be paramount and most important to the development of our Southwest Atlanta neighborhoods in District 57.
Thank you so much. Thank you, candidates. This ends our portion of the 4 core questions. We're now going to go to some audience question, and if you have a question, put it in the chat box. But I'm going to now turn it over to Beth from BeltLine Rail Now. Beth, are you there with the audience questions?
I am just trying to get my webcam to work.
Okay. We can hear you though. If
Here
you
I am.
Let's start.
So we have a few
I'll be
questions
timing,
from our audience. Let's start with Janae. What transit issue comes up most when talking with your constituents?
BeltLine. The factor that they have, in 2016, we approved a tax that money is not doesn't seem like it's being allocated to where it's supposed to be to develop the light rail and the shuttle. So yeah, I think the BeltLine is definitely the most common.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Alex. What transit issue comes up most when talking with your constituents?
I think it is the fact that there's not a sense of urgency from the city or the state in terms of actually laying rail down, deciding on routes and funding it. Everyone keeps talking about it being 10 years, 15, 20 years out when we need it now. People are moving in. It's getting harder and harder to get around the city. And if we don't address this, I mean, it effectively is going to choke our city's growth and thereby the region and therefore potentially the state. So it's really, the timeline of rail and transit is not fast enough for the folks that I talk to.
Thank you. Next up, we would like to hear from Kyle. What transit issue comes up most when talking with your constituents?
If I had to say the #1 transit issue is the safe streets in Southwest Atlanta. People want their children to be able to cross Cascade Road and go to Tuskegee Airmen Academy safely. People want to be able to bike down Metropolitan and go to Summerhill safely. People want to be able to walk down the sidewalks in our communities, where oftentimes we have to step into the street due to lack of sidewalks just to get to the BeltLine. So there are many issues that my constituents face even before they're able to make it to the BeltLine. We're dodging cars, we have poorly signaled lights, we have lack of sidewalks, poorly lit streets. So there is no one greater issue, because Southwest Atlanta constituents oftentimes talk about the lack of transit-oriented development at our MARTA stations. There's no reason why the Oakland City train station, after being issued an RFP for development in 2015, should still look blighted in the way it does. We just got an elevator in the elevator shaft since the Oakland City train station was built. So that goes to talk about there's no one issue when people in wheelchairs can't even access the MARTA train, when people can't go to the restroom at the MARTA station. There's no one issue in Southwest Atlanta that is greater than the other. I think people just want the investment, whether it starts with safe streets, whether it starts with transportation-oriented developments, or if it starts with the sidewalks. We have got to start somewhere. So we're lifting up all of the concerns because no one is greater than the other.
Thank you. And Stacy, what transit issue comes up most when talking with your constituents?
The issue that comes up most with regard to transit is that transit options don't go enough places for folks to get where they need to go. That's why that last mile connectivity is so important. And if you think about MARTA, is still really working on the original plan. Other systems that were in development at the same time as ours are already on phase 3 and 4, and we're still here at phase 1. And I remember when I first started working, my first law firm job was, we were at 14th and West Peachtree, and I lived at 8th and Peachtree. So literally just a few blocks away. And I took MARTA every day to work. But then as I developed in my career and I started needing to go to lunches and things during the day, meet with clients, it was not an option because I couldn't time the buses. I couldn't get enough connectivity to get where I ultimately needed to go. And if you think about it, folks that work and families, it's very rare that they just need to go one place and then come back. They've got to go to work, but then they may need to go and meet a client, or they may need to go and meet friends during the middle of the day. They need to go to pick up their kids and meet them at a school function or a sporting event. We've got to make sure that transit is actually going to work for families to get them where they want to go. And right now, that's not a reality. And that's why we've got to complete these things and get more funding from the state. And that is the #1 issue that I hear from constituents. And we can fix this if we devote more money to it. We increase the state share, and that starts with getting rid of this constitutional prohibition against using the motor fuel tax. And that's what I'll fight for from day one.
Thank you. Our next question has been sent in by George McDonald. He didn't mention his neighborhood. Indianapolis passed a transit funding sales tax the same year as Atlanta, 2016. That's almost 4 years ago. They've already completed a 13-mile bus rapid transit line, and this year are putting in a second line out for construction bids. Meanwhile, here MARTA has not even broken ground on a single line as part of the More MARTA expansion. How will you ensure MARTA actually starts delivering projects that taxpayers are already paying for? And for this one, let's start off with Kyle.
I think we've got to start holding the people accountable for what the constituents want. I think that it goes without saying that when we voted to increase the sales tax to provide transit on the BeltLine, and to see it pushed back to a completion date of nearly 2050 is absolutely egregious. Time and time again, we lift our voices in our communities, and we are handed over what other people think we deserve. Meanwhile, we're speaking for ourselves to make sure that people know what we want. And it's about time that we get what we need. So we've got to hold irons to the fire. And in the State House, we understand that all things take money in order to produce. And so to keep the burden off of the constituents of Atlanta, we've got to fund this at the state level. Again, we'll continue to drive home the fact that this $1.9 billion gas tax in Georgia has to be allocated in a more equitable way so that we can get the multimodal transportation needs that we want and that we have voted for and that we have stated that we want and need. And it's about time that we get those things. So we're going to continue to hold the people accountable that we put in the positions to do their job while fighting for the things that we need and demand at the State House.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Stacy, we'll turn to you. How will you ensure MARTA actually starts delivering projects that taxpayers are already paying for?
Certainly, the bully pulpit is part of that, raising awareness, holding community forums, and inviting and providing a conduit and way for voters to make their voices heard. Obviously, this is not exactly something that the state can go in and control right now, but it can in the future. And that is part of, I think, how do we started with the question is how do we get the state to put more money into transit? And I think if we make very specific deliverables be part of the streams for that money, and that say, if you don't meet these deadlines, then this next part of the money is not going to come. Like, you've got to be able to stay on course. You've got to do what you say you're going to do with the money. And from the state's perspective, we can hold them accountable with any money that we hand out. And I do think that will make sure that other folks in the legislature that are not just in the Atlanta delegation will be on board with voting for more transit funding. Because again, we can have all the Atlanta folks in favor of transit, and we do. That's not going to be enough votes. We got to go get votes from South Georgia Republicans, from North Georgia Republicans, from suburban Republicans and Democrats to make this a reality. I think being very specific about what we want, conditioning the funds on that, and then for projects that have already been approved but aren't being funded and pushed along the way that they can, is providing ways for the community to voice their concerns, and that usually tends to light fire under people when folks show up to meetings and make their voice heard, and we can provide an outlet for that.
Thank you. Next up, Janae, how will you ensure MARTA actually starts delivering projects that taxpayers are already paying for?
Well, I think it's a matter of really making sure that we know exactly who's responsible for what. It seems like a lot of times people have to push the buck, right? So they'll say, oh, it's a state responsibility, it's a city responsibility. I think it's a matter of figuring out who is responsible for what. We see that with our trash. We see that with so many different aspects here in Atlanta. You call 311, they connect you to one place, and I'm like, well, that's not our problem. So I think we need to figure out who's actually responsible for pushing MARTA, outside of MARTA, who else is responsible? How do we get our council members involved? How do we get our state reps involved? How do we come together and not just make this a community issue? We need to be upset as elected officials. Why isn't this happening? Why aren't my constituents getting what they're paying for? And I think that's where the conundrum is happening. It's being paid for. It's been paid for since 2016. So we need to figure out who, what, when, and where, and how to, and then once we get all those people together, make the change to get MARTA to do what they're supposed to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, how will you ensure MARTA actually starts delivering projects that taxpayers are already paying for?
At the beginning, I mentioned that I've been working on transportation issues on behalf of the city for 14 years now. And this is where that depth of relationship can really help. And this is a great example of that. First of all, the city council, y'all have to remember that the funds between that the sales tax go to are executed via an MOU between the city of Atlanta and MARTA. So we have an immediate a way to really put some heat to the fire here by working with the city, the mayor, and the city council to open that MOU up and demand a timeline. And so that's step number one. And obviously, I still have relationships with many of the city council members that I worked with alongside for 8 years. The Atlanta Regional Commission works on transportation. And what we need to do is work with them when the transportation comes up and start accelerating components of that, putting pressure on what we should be doing in the near term and not pushing things off like the BRTs or the transit. So you've got yet another opportunity of an advocate that we can employ. And obviously with my board service there, I have relationships over there. And then finally, the ATL. I mean, that is a newly created body that I have relationships with as well, that should be advocating for accelerating transit and transit-related projects. So, you know, there are a lot of players here, and it's a matter of knowing which player has what leverage and what tools they have to apply here, and then going and to find them, advocating them, and getting them to pull in the same direction.
Thank you. This next question is actually kind of a bit of a follow-up to that one, and it's addressed to Alex. It's from Stephanie Warner in Grant Park. Stephanie asks, it's going to take a political coalition to make transit along the BeltLine a reality. You served on the Atlanta City Council from 2006 until 2010. What has the City Council and Mayor done to try to get transit on the BeltLine? And what would it take to convince you, the City Council, and Atlanta's Mayor to do more?
Yeah. So correction, I was on the Atlanta City Council from 2010 to 2017, just for clarification. It's political will, quite frankly. And when I was on City Council, I mean, one of the biggest steps we took, aside from continuing to support the BeltLine and the tax allocation district and protecting that, was also passing the More MARTA referendum. And you know, that was to provide a big chunk of financing specifically to help the BeltLine. Now, unfortunately, the city reneged on its agreement and lowered the funding amount towards the BeltLine. So I think, you know, we need to go back and advocate with my former colleagues to make sure, to see if there are other funding mechanisms or funding streams for that. You know, when I was on City Council, I mean, I can remember a number of times when I had to contact Representative Gardner and then pull in GDOT and then work with the transportation department at the city. So I to address things like pedestrian safety or road safety. So I've had conversations. I have relationships with the district commissioner of the Georgia Department of Transportation. And it's just going to be a commitment. It's going to be understanding what players play which role. And then just, as I said earlier, it's the biggest complaint I get. There's not a sense of urgency. And as state rep, I can provide that sense of urgency across all the different organizations and entities that I've served on.
Thank you. This next question is for all of you, sent in by Lucy Bigham, who's lived in the same house in the Virginia Highland neighborhood for over 41 years. She says during her first 10 years there, trains were still using the BeltLine corridor less than 1/8 of a mile from her home. Lucy says, the Atlanta BeltLine Inc., ABI, 2019 annual report states that the East Side Trail corridor is shovel ready and that ABI is ready to move forward when MARTA designates an entity to design rail and allocates funds. Do you support designating ABI as the entity to design rail for the BeltLine and the Atlanta streetcar system? If yes, what would you do to help make this happen? Why? What would you do to help make this happen? If no, why not? And let's start this question off with Kyle.
It was such a, would you mind repeating that one more time for me?
Sure. Do you support MARTA? Do you support MARTA designating Atlanta BeltLine Inc. as the entity to design rail for the BeltLine and the streetcar system? If yes, what would you do to make this happen? If no, why not?
Yes, I support ABI being the facility or the vessel that allows the railway system and the streetcar to happen, as they have been the current entities to create all transit development thus far on the BeltLine. I think to disrupt that system would cause even more havoc to an already lengthy and exhausting process. Again, I will continue to make sure that all of our voices are heard. What I found out is that whether you've lived in Virginia Highlands or Morningside and your legacy community members in those communities, you also are facing rising taxes and having to make some really hard decisions for your families. And it is also important that we make sure that MARTA gives us what we voted for, and that BeltLine is held accountable to making sure it happens. And even with the rail line being so close to your home, that just goes to speak that we have to have more community input. What does it look like and what does it sound like when it comes past your house? And how do we develop it so that we're all enjoying the same conduit that serves Atlanta constituents? I think that we must continue to place pressure on the people responsible for providing us with the things that we ask for.
Thank you. Stacy, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. I agree. It makes sense for the Atlanta BeltLine to be involved in this, to take the lead on it. We need to lean on expertise where we have it and not pretend like we can just come in and wave a wand and do things. So we want to respect the work that's already been done and the expertise that's been built up. But obviously we want to make sure that all community partners are at the table, the city, MARTA, and others. And I think those communication lines need to stay open. That's how we're all going to be able to move forward. But most importantly, for this to happen, for any good transit project to happen, you need a champion. You need champions at the city level. You need champions at the state level to make sure that folks are being held accountable for what they say they were going to do, that the funds continue to flow, and that anytime you've got a bottleneck, that you can undo that. And that's where I think my experience will come in very handy in this district, and knowing how to pull the different levels of government, whether it's DOT, whether it's unlocking something at the federal level or at the state level. Those are all waters that I've navigated before, and I think being a champion for these issues is how they're going to get done. It's all well and good for us to all be aware of them, but if nobody picks up the torch and runs with it, then nothing's going to happen.
Thank you, Stacy. Janae, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. Yeah, ABI, I do believe that ABI needs to be the responsible party to carry out the vision that they initially put out there to everyone, so that they would, pass the tax. I would like to see a timeline put on ABI as to when things are going to happen. I think it just seems like everything's up in the air. So I think being able to see a timeline and being able to hold their feet to the fire on that timeline is going to be important. It's going to take all the connections from the city, the connections from the House. It's going to take our neighborhood presidents. It's going to take every community raising their voice and saying, hey, what's up with this timeline? So yeah, I really do. I think that a timeline is probably going to be our best answer, and really connecting all of our elected officials together and helping the community to carry it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so I'm going to assume that the alternatives from ABI would be MARTA or a third party that we don't know yet that would come in. And in that scenario, yes, I would say Atlanta BeltLine Inc. would be the appropriate person. And I'll tell you why. It has to do with accountability as well as money. In terms of accountability, I have more confidence in Atlanta BeltLine Inc. that we can, through the Atlanta City Council and the mayor, exert more control and demand more transparency and community engagement. For all of its strengths and all of the shortcomings in terms of process from inception to now, I do feel like ABI is doing a good job, and we know how we can strengthen that public input process with something as important as designing a corridor and rail. The other piece is money. I mean, a lot of it, there's funding from the tax allocation district that is provided by the city or administered through the city. And the MARTA, more MARTA tax is administered essentially through the city, although it is through MARTA. And I think, that's the finance guy in me. I think you just got to follow the money and stick with it at its source, because the money is the best way to control the outcome of a project, and make sure that you are having everybody at the table that needs to be at the table. So for those reasons, I say yes.
Thank you. I see that we have already gone 10 minutes past 7 o'clock, so we will need to wrap things up. But I do want to reassure you that if you sent in a question that wasn't answered, I will be forwarding it on to the candidates. And I'm going to turn things over to Matthew Rao.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted, and we need one webcam off. Beth, so if you sign your webcam off, I will sign on.
I can sign off. Hang on.
No, there we go.
Or Susanna. Okay,
Sorry.
there we go. So what a spirited discussion tonight. I want to take the time to thank each of the 4 of you candidates who have given really thoughtful answers about the issues tonight. And I also want to thank especially our moderator, Susanna Capelouto, for doing a fine job. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Y'all were great candidates, I have to say. You did. It was one of my favorite online forum ever. So.
Well,
we know we're your only one.
At BeltLine Rail Now, we hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation in electoral politics at the local and state level that puts transit in the forefront of the issues that are going to be debated. And I want to remind everyone, all of you 4 candidates will get a recording of tonight's forum so that you can go through that. And I just want to say again, thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank y'all very much. It was fun.
Don't
Thank
forget
everybody.
Follow us on BeltLineRailNow.com, on our Facebook page, Twitter feed, and on Instagram.
Don't forget to vote June 9th.
Don't forget to vote.
Yes.